So welcome to this Travel Weekly webinar. I'm Ian Taylor and I'm joined today by Charlie Gordon, who's Insight Director at the research and data analytics company Kantar. Charlie's going to present Kantar's latest research on UK consumer holiday intentions. He's going to speak for about 15 minutes and then we're going to just have a quick Q&A on the findings. Charlie, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, so my name's Charlie Gordon, as Ian says, and I've been working in this industry for over 20 years now. And my kind of day job is helping people to identify and understand consumer audiences using our TGI data set, which I will talk a bit more about in a second, but particularly here with a lens on the travel market. And shall I share my screen? So I'm just going to talk through some of the trends we're seeing in the market as we head into 2023, and just kind of, some food for thought about what British people are thinking regarding holidays this year and some of the surrounding context that they're working with. So a quick word on the data that we're looking at here today. This is Kantar's TGI data, which is built on a representative sample of 24,000 adults aged 15 plus in Great Britain. What TGI is, for those of you who don't know, it's a single survey where we explore all aspects of day-to-day life, things like demographics, but then also product and brand usage, attitudes, lifestyles, how people spend their time, their money, and also where they spend their time on media, so how they consume the kind of advertising, content, etc. And the way that TGI is used is largely by agencies, brands, and media owners to engage consumer target audiences. It's effectively the data currency for buying and selling advertising. So that's why it's kind of a really, important to have that big broad spread of where people are spending their time and money. Now, TGI has been running for, I think, over 50 years now. So we've got a huge kind of, swathe of trend data. But obviously in recent years, the kind of big trend data, I guess, is the kind of pre and post-pandemic. And as part of TGI, what we do is we ask people if they've had holidays domestically or abroad in the last 12 months. And unsurprisingly, through the pandemic, we've kind of seen that, that hugely impacted. Breaks abroad, particularly much more impacted than domestic breaks. Here we see it, when we were asking this question in January 21, fewer than 10% of people had had any short breaks or holidays abroad in the last 12 months. But those are both now for domestic holidays and for abroad holidays rebounding really strongly as we come into 2023 with, I think, nearly 2/5 of people saying they had a holiday in the British Isles in the last year, and around a fifth saying they've been abroad, and all the trend data there suggesting that's on the way up. And so we also ask about kind of mindset and where people are at in their heads. And we ask people a question about whether or not they're kind of engaged, is something planning holidays something they enjoy doing? Is it something they spend time thinking about? And we have these metrics. I enjoy planning holidays, and I'm always looking for inspiration on where to go for holidays or short breaks. And actually what we've seen is even through the pandemic, when it was perhaps quite a challenge for people to do too much there, these metrics have largely held up in the face of a lot of challenges. And then at the moment, as we go into things like kind of, cost of living challenges and so on, it still shows that holidays really are, a kind of important facet of mind for British consumers. So heading into 2023, what do we see the market looking like? Well, holiday intention is far more robust than last year. But really, we see that kind of engagement I talked about before coming through on this slide. When we looked at this data this time last year, around 2/3 of people weren't sure what their plans were regarding their kind of main holiday. This year, we're seeing that around 2/3 of people are saying they either have booked, so around 17%, or they plan to book, which is around half of people. So effectively a switch has flipped, where last year 2/3 weren't sure, this year 2/3 know what's happening. A really kind of strong change of mind there. And this is in the face of those kind of strong headwinds that we hear so much about. There are cost-saving priorities across the board, really. But among those priorities, there are many that come before reducing holiday spend. We see things like kind of cutting down on meals out, focusing on essentials, interestingly, cutting back on large purchases, so things like a new car, home renovation, etc. Reducing holiday budget is still a factor, and about a quarter of people are saying that. But definitely comes down the list behind other things in terms of where people see themselves saving money. And actually, I mean, who is it that's finding this kind of squeeze with their holidays was a question that we asked ourselves here. There's actually little difference by things like age, whether or not you've got children, social grade, etc. It is very much how you feel about your financial situation that is driving probably what your plans are this year. We see here on the left, are you comfortable on your present income? Those who say they are, half of them saying we plan to book, and around a quarter saying maybe less so, not taking a holiday. Those who are finding it very difficult actually switches quite a lot. Apologies for the scale sizes here, but that plan to book figure drops below 40%. So really kind of different picture for them. It shows that it is the money that is important. And I think something to stress here on this slide, which is perhaps just a sort of, important for the future, is that those financial comfort levels are starting to change. They've historically trended very flat. But what we've seen in the last year is more and more people starting to say they find this difficult or very difficult on their present income. It's gone from around about 20% to over 25%. So that's becoming a factor in people's minds, and whether we've seen that sort of start to play out yet, we'll have to wait and see. The good news is that the concerns around kind of travel restrictions and, a lot of the kind of media furore around things like problems going abroad are easing. We asked people who said they didn't plan to take a main holiday in 2023, what were the factors that were holding them back? And here we see that it is, the general cost of living from things like inflation and interest rates. That's the big one. That's half of people who say they're not planning on going abroad saying that. But then also this uncertainty around personal income, will I have a job, or what level of job will that be? Or if you run your own business, are there challenges there? Energy costs a concern for some, definitely a factor in people's minds. But what's kind of, I guess, good to see is that all of the stuff around travel restrictions, airport crowding and so on is really, kind of secondary edge concern. It's much more that income situation that people have that is worrying them. And so how does all of that play out in where we intend to go? Well, what we've seen is that these tend to be fairly stable measures, and actually they've fluctuated a bit over the last year as things like restrictions have changed. Europe is still the top choice. 56% of us are planning to go to Europe, and that's slightly up from last year. Britain itself still doing really well, over a quarter saying British Isles will feature. So I think perhaps some suggestion that people rediscovering what's on their doorstep is holding up still. But also a factor in that is this perhaps slight reticence on the rest of the world compared to last year. Of those people, saying perhaps why they're less likely to go abroad, again, people cite the cost of living as a factor. The big one here that comes through that doesn't come through elsewhere is this increased costs of travel. Around a third of people say that that's the thing that's putting them off going abroad, going so far afield, just the fact that it's more expensive. But again, things like kind of, airport queues, COVID, they're coming much further down the line this year. They're not really in people's minds in terms of their plans. And when people have kind of come to picking their destinations, perhaps not a surprise, it's it's the old favorites really. Those who have booked or are planning a 2023 holiday, the location is the most important thing, accommodation is really important in their minds, and then it's the weather, and then after that it's culture and activity. So it really is the kind of sun, sea, etc. But accommodation comes through really strongly as well, suggesting people are kind of being quite discerning about what they're looking for. And that tracks in actually what people kind of are spending, where they will spend in their holidays. Lots of people fret. I mean, around about a third of those who've already booked say they plan to spend more. So there is, money to be had there, and that money kind of spent across the piece. We see here location, around a quarter of people saying they're likely to spend more on the location, quarter saying more on the accommodation. The ones that maybe doing a bit less well, things like flights, activities and trips and so on. But the kind of core holiday elements of location, accommodation, eating and drinking are really holding up, and actually people are looking to spend good money on those. Only overall around 10%, I think just 12%, I think it was, who said they would be spending less on their holiday this year. And I think it's important to understand there that obviously we have factors like inflation and increased costs that will be partly driving that. But also, people are just kind of willing to put money into this. We thought it'd be interesting just to kind of set these in context, I guess, because obviously the British are known as a kind of real, going abroad, traveling holiday nation. But how do we look in the context of Europe this year? And actually, we're perhaps a little bit down against some of our kind of neighbours. We see here intention to take a holiday or short break in the next 6 months. That actually Germany and France come through really strongly here. This is from data in November, which perhaps sets some of the context for that when we were entering into a tough winter. But again, just interesting to see that, we're sort of slightly behind there, and whether we'd expect that to level up or not, I guess we'll have to see. And similarly, in terms of air travel, not surprising perhaps that GB kind of bounces back a bit here, because to get to places we have to have air travel. But again, perhaps just slightly behind some of the kind of European rivals. But I suspect we'll see those kind of level out as time comes ahead. So yeah, in summary, I think what we see is that, that expected rebound is coming this year. I think we've seen that. And hopefully kind of early indication is that's coming true in the market as well. There's a note of caution around this element of affordability. People are willing to spend, but perhaps we should keep an eye on whether or not that situation changes, as perhaps some of the things bite in the longer term. But actually where they will try and preserve spend, or where they will have to preserve spend to do what they want to do, is on their holiday and on the different aspects of it. And yeah, just be interesting to see kind of how we net out against Europe in the months ahead. That's me. Back to you, Ian.
Okay, well, many thanks, Charlie. There was a lot in that, although the slides were beautifully clear and simple, actually. So the points come across really clearly. In the trends data at the outset, it was striking that although we had a strong recovery last year, those taking an overseas holiday in 2022 was still only about half the proportion it was in 2019. So a lot of people hadn't returned abroad by the turn of the year. That could explain why bookings have been so strong in January and February, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, that people have almost kind of waited to see how this winter has gone for them. We were collecting this data around November, December, as we were entering into what we weren't sure how winter was going to look in this country financially and so on. And maybe as we're coming out the other end, I think there is that kind of like, okay, here we are in 2023. There's no COVID, but that is less of a factor. The economy is maybe in a better place than we feared, and so people are now starting to take the plunge, which perhaps they weren't so sure about late last year.
Okay, there was a slide showing the proportion of people who say they enjoy planning holidays, and there was no change last year in comparison with 2019. But there was a 5-point drop in the proportion saying they're always looking for inspiration on where to go, and that was a bit of a surprise to me. Anyway, did that surprise you? I mean, have people maybe got out of the habit of looking for holidays during the pandemic?
It's a good question. I think there are probably a few things going on there. I mean, it's not a huge dip, but it's one that warrants further investigation. I suspect, given the few years we've had, that perhaps people are just a bit more cautious and perhaps revert to some old favorites, so feel the need for inspiration less. And yeah, do you how much time do you look for inspiration when you're not sure what's happening, particularly with the economy, with income levels and financial comfort and so on, which obviously play a huge part in that. But it'll definitely be something we keep an eye on because, yeah, the often you see with trends, they move at a level where you kind of think, oh, that's probably nothing. But then the next time on, it's moved again, and then it looks like something. So certainly something we'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, okay. And when it came to people's holiday intentions for this year, it was apart from the fact that there's a significant increase, almost double in people intending to take a holiday. The proportion plan who'd already booked at the time of the survey for this year was pretty much the same as in year on year. It was the proportion intending to book that was so much higher. That was striking to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what it probably speaks to is that there is a hardcore of the market that will always, kind of get this stuff in the diary and booked up as early as possible. And then it's the kind of bigger percentage of the market, effectively, those 50% of people we've got this year saying they're planning, whereas last year I think it was more like 20% of people saying they were planning. So it's kind of getting them up the chain. And this year a lot more people feel confident about being able to plan and do stuff. Last year we were again in a period of restrictions and not sure exactly what would happen. So I think this year definitely seems like a more confident outlook for holidays.
Yeah, so there's every reason to be confident that the boom in early bookings for 2023 will continue. Um, the slide on the where people are looking to save money was interesting. You showed five priorities for reducing spending, and holiday spending was the lowest of them. Did you ask people about other spending priorities? Where did holidays come in relation to those?
Holidays was, I think what we showed in that slide was the top kind of 6 or 7 answers. So it's part of a much longer list. But to be honest, the things that came through were kind of the big ones. It was, trying to cut down on large purchases, shopping. We've seen this week, I think the latest Kantar shopping data suggested that people are having to spend like an extra £800 a year on just groceries. So people trying to keep on control of that type of thing. But we did have in a wider range things like we had, kind of mortgage changes, changing supermarkets, changing kind of, renting situations and so on. Those things some of those things are kind of mix of, well, they're not going to make much difference, or they're really hard and complicated to do. And so fewer people will be able to do them. You can't just kind of change your mortgage at the drop of a hat without needing to think about the implications of that. So yeah, we see in that larger list, there are lots of things. The level of difference doesn't necessarily equate, which is why it's quite a difficult list to kind of evaluate. But holidays relative to other things similar like large purchases, etc., seem to be much more protected. People would rather go abroad than get a new car, basically.
Yes. And when it came to people spending on holiday, you said about a third plan to spend more, which is obviously that's heartening. But a majority intending to hoping to spend about the same. That might be a bit unrealistic given costs have risen across the board, mightn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that probably speaks to the fact that there are lots of people still in the planning phase. Perhaps they haven't necessarily looked yet at kind of what the implications are. They have things in mind, they know they want to go, and they're thinking they know how much it costs. Perhaps when it comes to actually biting the bullet, they might see that they will need to spend more to get what they got before. So it'll be interesting to see whether that changes the dynamic in terms of where people go and what they do
Okay.
long term.
And when you ask people who don't plan to take a holiday, why not? Obviously, the cost of living was overwhelmingly the most significant thing. Interesting that people didn't cite airport delays or cancellations. That looks as though it's dropped out of people's uh, thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I think those are things that, we see top of mind and in responses when it's all over the news, but actually when it's not in the news, it's not something people worry about. They quickly come back to the more kind of the realities of going on holiday. You expect to be in the airport for a bit, but you try not to worry about it.
Yeah,
Um, it's more kind of how much does it cost and where do I want to go?
yeah. Where the comparison of intentions with other major European markets um, was potentially significant. Bit of a surprise, actually. I mean, Germany's the biggest outbound source market, and a lot of people travel over land to go on holiday from Germany, but it's still a big air market. So, a 7 point difference between the intention to travel from the UK and intention in Germany looks significant to me. And it was an 8 point difference with France. Did you see that as significant? Was that a surprise?
A little bit, but I think when we stop and think about what that data is showing, because that is it's from our global survey rather than a GB survey, obviously. And what the question is slightly different there. We're asking about whether people intend to take any type of break in the next 6 months as opposed to a main holiday. And I think it's important to remember as well then that that data was collected just at the start of winter, where things like ski trips, winter sports, etc., are much more of a factor in Germany and France, for example, than they would be in GB. So I think that might be what's driving some of that. I'd expect if we asked that in, say, March, to see probably more level pegging across that there.
Yeah, and the intention to fly from the UK was 6 points higher than it was in Germany, which perhaps bears that out. Um, the Most of this research was done in sort of November time. Is that
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
November with the cost of living stuff was more December and into January.
and into January. Yeah. So the economic outlook has moderated, um, improved somewhat since the start of the year. So if anything, we could perhaps expect to see this data show even greater intention to take a holiday. But at the same time, you mentioned this assessment of financial comfort, which was moving in the opposite direction.
Yeah, that I think is the kind of word of caution on all of this. I'd agree that overall we think it's probably trending in a positive direction for travel and holidays. The only kind of alarm bell is this financial comfort metric, which is historically fairly flat. And what we've seen in the last year is that's just taken a turn in the kind of unpleasant direction. More people are saying they're finding it difficult on their current income or very difficult, and fewer people are saying they're very comfortable. They've effectively swapped places. And I think that's one where, as we saw in the early slides that I showed, that's the big factor in whether or not people go abroad. How do they feel financially? If that keeps trending in that direction, that will be something probably to worry about, or we'll see if that stabilizes again, if we've just been through a kind of blip or not. Whether the kind of stabilizing in the economy is real or not will probably drive that.
Okay, and typically, how big a difference do you see between people's intention to take an overseas holiday and what they end up doing? Because there is a difference normally, isn't there?
Yeah, we do normally see that, if we're saying kind of 2/3 of people talk about doing something great, then when we look back at the data for, well, what did people do in the last 12 months, we're normally a few points behind. So, if we're at kind of 65, 66% saying they're going to do something, we probably end up, when we look at the data a year later, seeing around 60% having done it. So I think we're not miles apart, but there is a difference, as you say.
And does that wax and wane with the state of the economy? So when the economy's, you know, when people are generally doing better, the proportion, the gap between what people say they intend to do and what they end up doing is smaller than when they're feeling financial pressure.
the economy will certainly be a factor and will make it more sort of susceptible to fluctuation, yes. But obviously there are lots of other life events as well, many of which we capture in TGI that would be factors in that as well. So yeah, things like kind of health and family situations and so on. But I think the economy would be the one that would put that under most pressure at a large scale.
Okay, so overwhelmingly upbeat um, research findings. When are you likely to take another look at this, Gordon? Charlie?
I think we'll be hoping to look at this with a view to kind of setting people up with good information for 2024 season. So we'll be revisiting a kind of travel section in the TGI survey later this year, probably kind of around Q3. And yeah, hoping to kind of come back to you with more information on the way we see the market heading into the new year, hopefully on the back of a great 2023 season.
Good. That's great. Ollie Gordon from Kantar, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Been a pleasure.